and welcome to Scary Stories from the Lake, presented by Little Lake Theatre. Tonight's tale was written by the godfather of vampire stories himself, Mr. Bram Stoker. This particular story does not involve vampires. However, it does involve blood. This play is an adaptation of his short story entitled A Gypsy Prophecy. It takes place in the late 19th century in the English countryside at the home of Mr. Joshua Considine, a barrister, and his wife, Mary. Considine's life had not been an eventful one. The only disturbing element which he had ever known was in the wooing of Mary Winston, and the long-continued objection of her ambitious parents, who expected a brilliant match for their only daughter. When Mr. and Mrs. Winston had discovered the affections of the young barrister, they had tried to keep the young people apart by sending their daughter away for a long round of visits, having made her promise not to correspond with her lover during her absence. Love, however, had stood the test. Neither absence nor neglect seemed to cool the passion of the young man, and jealousy seemed a thing unknown to his sanguine nature. So after a long period of waiting, the parents had given in, and the young folk were married. Our story begins years later, during a lovely evening in the early autumn. The very air was full of rest and quiet happiness, as though it were an expression of the peacefulness and joy which made a heaven of the home of the young married folk. Joshua and Mary were entertaining an old college chum of Joshua's, a doctor named Gerald Burleigh, who had come to stay with them for a fortnight or two. Gerald had learned that a gypsy camp had recently arrived on the east side of the moor near Joshua and Mary's house, and expressed an interest in investigating its curiosities. Gerald pleaded with Joshua to accompany him to the camp. He wanted Joshua to get his fortune told, to determine whether or not the gypsies were impostors. Feeling it would be good for a lark, Joshua finally gave in. Mary told Joshua not to give them any clues that might influence the fortune. She told him to keep Gerald out of harm's way, and she also told Joshua not to flirt with any of the gypsy maidens. Joshua said, "Mary, you have nothing to worry about. I won't let magic or maidens bring either of us to any harm." Eager to begin his adventure, Gerald took off, while Joshua continued to speak with his wife. A call from Gerald to come along sent Joshua on his way. After blowing Mary a kiss, they set out on their journey. But something didn't feel quite right to Mary. She watched them disappear into the woods with an uneasy feeling in her spirit. A gypsy maiden gave the men a thorough going-over before asking them if they would like to receive a message from the stars. Gerald said to Joshua, "You must cross her hand with silver. It's the most important part of the mystery." The maiden looked at Joshua and the coin and said, "You must cross the gypsy's hand with gold." Gerald grinned and said, "You are at a premium as a subject." Joshua told the maiden, "All right, my girl, but you must now give me an excellent fortune for it." The maiden replied, "It is not for me to give good fortune or bad, but only to read what the stars have said." Joshua was confused as to what startled the maiden so. But then, something else caught the boy's eye. "It's the Gypsy Queen," said Gerald. "We're in luck tonight." "Hold out your hand," demanded the Queen. Gerald said he hadn't been spoken to that way since he was at school. The Queen told Joshua that his hand must once again be crossed with gold. 100% at this game," said Gerald. The Queen asked Joshua if he has a strong will and a true heart that can be brave for one he loves. His lack of vanity prevented him from saying yes, but Joshua said that he hoped so. In that case, the Queen said that she will answer for him because she saw resolve in his face. She asked him if he had a wife that he loved. "Yes," said Joshua. "Then leave her at once," said the Queen. "Go from her now while your heart is free from wicked intent. Go quick and go far, and never see her face again." Annoyed, Joshua turned to leave, but Gerald reminded him that he had paid in full for a fortune. There's no use being indignant with the stars or their prophet. The Queen scolded Gerald and told him to let Joshua go, and go ignorant if he will not be warned. Joshua said to the Queen, "I will see this thing out, but you have only given me advice. I paid for a fortune." "Be warned," said the Gypsy Queen. "The stars have been silent for long. Let the mystery wrap them round." Joshua said, "My dear madam, I do not get within touch of a mystery every day, and I prefer for my money knowledge rather than ignorance. I can get the latter commodity for nothing when I want any of it." "As you wish," said the Queen. She chastised the men for responding to her warning with scorn and levity. "On your own heads will be the doom," she told them. "Amen," said Gerald. Then the Gypsy Queen uttered these words.
"I see here the flowing of blood. It will flow before long. It is running in my sight. It is flowing through the broken circle of a severed ring."
Go on.
Must I speak more plainly? This is the hand of a murderer. The murderer of his wife.
The barrister in him could not resist, and he responded, "Well, I think if I were you, I should prophesy some jurisprudence into my fortunes. You say my hand is the hand of a murderer. Well, whatever it may potentially be in the future, it is at present not one. You ought to give your prophecy in such terms as the hand which will be a murderer's, or rather the hand of one who will be the murderer of his wife. The stars don't seem rather adept at technicalities.
The stars see all, responded the Queen. You have been warned.
On their way back across the moor, Gerald tried to comfort Joshua, saying, "You do realize that was all a joke, don't you? A ghastly one, but still a joke. But it would be well to keep it between us." "What do you mean?" said Joshua. "I mean you shouldn't tell your wife. It might alarm her." "My dear Gerald, what are you talking about?" said Joshua. "My wife would not be afraid of me if all the gypsies that ever came from Bohemia agreed that I was to murder her. The thought would pass from her mind quicker than you could say Jack Robinson." The good doctor responded, "Women are far more superstitious than we are, old man. They are blessed, or cursed, with a nervous system to which we are strangers. I see too much of it in my work not to realize it. Take my advice and do not tell her, or else you will frighten her." "My dear fellow, I would not have secrets from my wife," Joshua answered. "Why, it would be the beginning of a new order between us. We have no secrets from each other. If we ever do, then you may begin to look out for something odd between us. Still, at the risk of being too forward, I say again, be warned." "The gypsy's very words," said Joshua. "You and she seem quite of one accord. Tell me, old man, is this a put-on? You told me of the gypsy camp. Did you arrange all of this with Her Majesty?" Joshua warned Mary that before she approached him, she needed to know the doom of which the stars had spoken. Mary wanted to hear the fortune, but told Joshua not to frighten her. He said that is not his intent, but she needed to know the truth so that she may make the necessary arrangements in advance. He told her that her effigy may yet be seen at Madame Tussaud's, because the irresponsible stars had declared that soon his hand will be stained with blood. Her blood. Right after Mary's fainting, Gerald walked into the room, and upon learning that Joshua had told Mary the unfortunate fortune, he couldn't help but tell Joshua, "I told you so." After a little while, Mary recovered from her swoon, but only to fall into strong hysterics, in which she laughed and wept and raved and cried, and many other words of fear and prayer. Joshua Considine was in a state of mind bordering on agony, and when at last Mary became calm, he knelt by her and kissed her feet and hands and hair, and called her all the sweet names and all the tender things his lips could frame. All that night he sat by her bedside and held her hand. All through the night and up to the early morning, she kept waking up from sleep and crying out in fear, till she was comforted by the awareness that her husband was watching beside her. Breakfast was late the next morning, but during it Joshua received a telegram, which required him to drive over to Withering, nearly 20 miles away. He was loath to go, but Mary would not hear of it. And so before noon he drove off in his dog-cart, alone. When he was gone, Mary retired to her room. She did not appear at breakfast, but when lunch was served outside, she came to join her guest. "I feel so silly about last night, but I couldn't help being frightened," she said. "The gypsies may only be imagining things, but after thinking about it, I have come up with a test to see if the prediction is false." "What is your plan?" asked Gerald. She said she would go herself to the gypsy camp and get her fortune read. Gerald asked if he could join her. "Oh, no," said Mary. "That would spoil it. They might recognize you and realize who I am." "No," she said. "I will go alone." So Mary went off to the gypsy camp by herself, hopeful that she would put this prophecy nonsense to rest. But things didn't go exactly as she planned. She returned frantically to the house during afternoon tea. "When I got to the camp," Mary said to Gerald, "there did not seem to be a soul about. I went into the center and stood there. Suddenly a tall woman stood beside me. 'Something told me I was wanted,' she said. I held out my hand and laid a piece of silver on it. She took from her neck a small golden trinket and laid it there also. Then she grabbed them and threw them into the stream that ran nearby. Then she took my hand in hers and spoke, 'Naught but blood in this guilty place,' and turned away. I caught hold of her and asked her to tell me more. After some hesitation, she said, 'Alas, alas, I see you lying at your husband's feet, and his hands are red with blood.'" Gerald responded, "Surely this woman has a fetish for murder." "Do not laugh," Mary scolded. "I cannot bear it." Not long after, Joshua returned, bright and cheery, and hungry as a hunter after his long drive. His presence cheered his wife, who seemed much brighter, but she did not mention her visit to the gypsy camp, and so Gerald did not mention it either. As if by an unspoken agreement, neither of them brought up the subject during the evening. But there was a strange, settled look on Mary's face, which Gerald could not help but observe. In the morning, Joshua came down to breakfast later than usual. Mary had been up and about the house from an early hour, but as the time drew on, she seemed to get a bit nervous, and now and again threw round an anxious look. Gerald could not help noticing that everyone at breakfast was having difficulties with their food. It was not that the meat was tough, but that the knives were all so blunt. Being a guest, he remained politely quiet, but watched Joshua draw his thumb across the edge of his knife in an unconscious sort of way. At the action, Mary turned pale and almost fainted again. After breakfast, Gerald left for the day to visit another friend, leaving Mary and Joshua alone in the house. The two of them went into the garden to enjoy the day, with Joshua reading and Mary gathering flowers. Mary asked Joshua to get some roses for her. He reached for his pocket knife to cut the stems, but found that it was not there. breakfast cutlery didn't seem to do the trick either. In frustration, he asked Mary if she was the one who dulled all the knives in the house. She asked for his forgiveness, saying how frightened she was by the prophecy. Joshua, hurt by her lack of trust in him and angered by the ruining of the cutlery, said to her that this needs to end. "Where are you going?" she screamed. Where he was going was into the house to search for another knife. But the knife he had in mind was not the kind you kept in the kitchen. What he was after was a special gift his brother had sent him from northern India. It was a Gurkha knife, a great hunting knife which wreaked havoc in close quarters with the enemies of the local Gurkha during the mutiny. It was of great weight, but so evenly balanced that it seemed light. With one of these knives, a Gurkha could cut a sheep in two.
The gypsy was very near the truth. Too near for the real thing ever to occur now, dear.
Quite right. Quite right. Now let's put all this silliness of gypsies and prophecies behind us. You just rest. Everything's going to be all right.